Today I'm going to be talking about live stream mixes and reviewing some of them over the past few years with my friend Gibran. He was one of my very first online audio students, and so we've been working together for a really long time. We'll talk about how the mixes have progressed and improved over time, and take a look at some of the plugins that he's using on vocals on his Midas M32 using Live Professor as a plugin host. If you're new here, my name is James and I help worship leaders, sound techs, and church tech directors eliminate the mystery and frustration around sound at church. So if that's you, go ahead and mash subscribe and let's get on to the video. All right, so Gibran, welcome to the Attaway Audio YouTube channel. Glad to have you on.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you, where are you from, what church are you serving at, and what capacity? And then, we'll go on to check out your live stream in just a minute.
Yeah, well, so I am Gibran. I am a father of one. I love being married. I enjoy it thoroughly. Also enjoy just serving at church, primarily in the area of audio. I think there's just something about doing something that is like, one, not only high interest for you personally, but two, just being able to just bring glory to the Father as well, and just helping people engage corporately at worship. So I do that primarily for our church. I help out whenever I can. I am also an elder that will be rolling off in a couple of months, and excited to do more sound things with my time there.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for serving. I know there are many thankless jobs in the church. Audio is one of them. Being an elder can sometimes seem like one of them, especially when people can be critical of decisions that they don't have all the information for. So I get that's the fine line to walk sometimes. So tell me about your live stream. Like, what's kind of your goal or your vision for what you want your broadcast to sound like? How does that, play into how you make it sound in the room? What's your kind of goal for what it should sound like there at Laurelwood?
I think the primary goal, which might seem kind of basic, is to just have it be non-distracting, and to have it translate well across all devices. So non-distracting in terms of like musically, does this help you engage in worship, but also it doesn't sound weird. And part of that is like having it, for me, play back well on all devices, whether it be in stereo or mono, or you're listening in your car or on your cell phone. I at least want it to sound non-distracting and musically pleasant to help you engage in worship. A lot of what we've also tried to do is try to help the audience, the online audience, kind of feel like they're in this space, and like give them a sense of like maybe the energy that the congregation's feeling, like adding crowd mics.
Yeah. Crowd mics, I can tell you guys added those early on in the videos you sent me to check out. I've been watching your, live streams and giving you feedback for several years now. But even just hearing that even early on, like when things are still rough, it seems like the team was kind of new and still kind of gelling. But crowd mics were a big part of that still. And I think that was the idea of let's make sure that everybody feels like they're here with us as much as we can. And, the improvement has been drastic over the last couple of years at least. So having that distraction-free online mix, like people are listening in different spots, that's a really tall order. What are some of the things you've done to kind of overcome the challenges to getting it there?
It's been a series of baby steps, honestly. But I think the first thing is just recognizing the difference between what your front of house mix might need versus what your online mix might need. And that's dynamic range, the reduction in dynamic range. So, as much as I like the musical part of the service, like I should consider the whole part of the service, so it's kind of like disengaging to have like the music be like screaming loud, and then your preacher starts preaching the sermon and he's like down here, and then you gotta like reach for your remote and like turn it up. And then at least the way our service is structured, a lot of the times then there's like a musical response after the sermon. So now that comes back on, so you gotta like rush for the remote and turn it back down, and those types of things. So I think that was the first step for us, just trying to reduce the dynamic range there. And then from there on, just the more I would consider nuanced things to worship. Like, are we getting the vocal pocket right? Is it too far in front? Is it too far in back? And then just a sense of space. I feel like we've come a long way in, because like a lot of the mixes, like even if they were like musically in the right place, like they just were like relatively dry compared to like what else you're hearing. So I think those were the things that we tried to hit. And then everything beyond that was just like a series of baby steps. Like, hey, I think this mix sounded good this Sunday, but that kick bass relationship didn't quite sound right. How do I fix that? Is this just like my ears getting used to what I hear musically in like well-recorded music, or maybe I need to learn a new tool? So I know, at least for me, like I really enjoy the side chain on the kick, the bass, because it just locks it into place, and it's like you kind of almost don't have to worry about it after that.
Nice. Before we go on to some of the other tools that you've added recently, I know you've spent a lot of time on your vocal chain and getting your vocals really locked in. Let's take a listen to some of the mixes that you've had from your church. Not all of these are you mixing, but let's go to one from, this looks like May of 2020. And I think in your email you said, team was still afraid to use the drum kit, so we got a cajon and some other instruments. Let's listen to a little bit of that, and then let me see if I can share my screen with you so that you can hear it too. So let me just listen and then I'll respond.
Okay.
Yeah, this one, you can tell the band is kind of like, we're trying to make it happen. There's no bass player. They're trying to get some energy going. But the acoustic guitar seems way out in front, and the piano seems really tucked back. There's not a great amount of balance between the instruments to like keep it full. And then what that does is it makes it feel like, the acoustic guitar is a hi-hat with chords or a shaker with chords on top of the cajon. And then the vocals are like way out in front. So this was not a great example of vocal pocket, of keeping things full. Even with a sparse band, there was room for improvement there. Let's take a listen to 2022. So this was a couple years after that. And let's listen to some of that improvement there. So this one, I can hear a whole lot more of the band supporting the vocal. Like you can already tell there's a big difference in those baby steps that you've taken in applying stuff to your live stream. There's a lot more fullness trying to keep those vocals really connected. One thing you mentioned in your email was about the busyness of the bass player and trying to like hide that a little bit. It's when people are overplaying, you don't want to draw more attention to it. We'll listen to how that changes in one of your more recent mixes. But again, that's another thing that I'm noticing is it's not just locked in with the kick, it's locked in with the kick with a lot of other stuff and a lot of fills and things too. And that's one of those things that even non-musical people kind of get like distracted by, where it's kind of like, oh, there's this extra thing going on. And we're not always able to just respond to great musicians that have great tone and are locked in on their parts and just make the mix gel. We've got to kind of like make sure that we're glossing over some things that aren't really making people pay attention better to the worship mix or to what they're supposed to be paying attention to engaging in worship. But again, in here, there's probably a crowd here where in the 2021 there was probably not. But the crowd mics are prominent, and that's been an important element for your live stream mix over the last several years. And things are there. Like every element can be heard, even if the balance isn't exactly locked in and right? So it seems like we're making those baby steps and getting things closer. It sounds fuller, and I think you've, by this point, had applied some of the multi-bus techniques that we've talked about in the broadcast audio course. But you can tell things are gelling together and staying fuller. Even when things come down, the levels don't disappear below the vocals, and those instruments stay supporting through there. Let me take a listen to one from November of 23. So this is one I made a few more notes on. And here we're hearing a lot more of the... For Jesus, there's nothing impossible. We're hearing a lot more of the space that you've added, right? One other thing that I noted is that the snare sounds really good and the overheads are nice and wide. The electric tone is pretty thick, but there's a lot of things that go into electric tone, and it's not always possible to thin that out well on your end, especially if they're switching between clean and dirty tones. So if they've got overdrive and their overdrive is too thick, but then they clean up their tone, if you made your overdrive tone and say at the soundboard, you made your guitar thinner because that overdrive sounded a little bit thick, it might be that when they clean it up, now that sounds too thin, right? So the complexity of the sound source of an electric guitar, it makes it a lot harder to just dial in at the soundboard. A lot of times we've got to help our guitar players kind of shape their tone so that it sounds tonally in the same ballpark even when they go from clean to dirty. And that's a common thing with a lot of overdrives is, trying to thin that out a little bit so that it's not a little too thick. One thing that can also help is just rolling up the high pass filter a little bit more. That'll make a little bit more room for the bass and those sub lows. You don't need every bit of thickness for electric guitars down there. Bass feels a little bit tubby. I don't know another good word to describe that, but maybe a little bit too heavy in the 125, 150 hertz range, maybe. My ear training skills have gotten noticeably out of practice lately. I need to get back onto Sound Gym and Quiz Tones to get that, but there's something in the bass that feels a little bit tubby in this one that actually got better in the next one, and we'll check that out and listen to it. At 13:45, if you're watching and you're going back and checking out these as well, I'll put some more detailed notes in there. At 13:45, it sounds like the background vocal is a little bit in front of Kevin. Kevin's the worship leader, if you guys aren't familiar. So the female vocal was a little bit in front of the lead vocal. And that can often happen, especially when you're mixing front of house, and front of house is also going to the broadcast. When you're getting those vocals balanced, one thing to remember is that for front of house, you're also hearing 200 to 500 people also singing the melody in the room there with you. So it can be really helpful to make sure that your background vocals maybe are tucked back a little bit because you're getting so much more support for the melody in the room. You might not notice that, online, the lead vocal is a little bit drowned out by the background vocals or the harmony parts. The vocals do sound good, and Kevin's vocal cut better at a later chorus. So it might have been the part where his vocal range wasn't cutting so much and hers was a little bit clearer. Sometimes when singers are singing lower, their voices don't cut as much. So maybe that's a time when you ride up the fader just a little bit, or just remember when Kevin's singing lower, I need to make sure that his voice gets a little bit, a little bump, maybe 2 dB, just to make sure that that's coming through well online, even though it might sound fine in the room. So you're kind of mixing front of house, but you're also imagining the broadcast mix at the same time, which is a challenge, but when you've gone through all the baby steps to get to where you are, now your brain has the space to be able to say, okay, maybe I need to shift this a little bit this way to make it sound its best for the online audience as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, I love how the dynamic range, you talked about that being one of your values, is make sure the dynamic range isn't too great. Even in the music itself, when it goes from a big dynamic and everybody's in to a smaller, like it's just the piano or piano and pad, that doesn't feel like it drops off into oblivion. It doesn't come down so much. And that's a fantastic example of what compression in stages getting to your live stream can really help. It doesn't ever feel crushed when it's big. It doesn't feel like it's pumping when it's big, but when it's quiet, it's still present. It's not like it drops off the face of the earth as well.
Yeah. Can I add in on that, James?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I found like one of the things we did and then changed was, so I think there was a recommended bus compressors. And our initial thought was like, well, I don't want to burn a compressor just for the bass, just kind of managing resources. But, like what I found is that compressor, I think we probably had too much flowing through to like the matrix compressor. We're on the M32 and it would like, it felt like it would pump, like the bass coming through, like clamped down on it too hard. So yeah, I feel like a little big step we made to fix that was just kind of biting the bullet on the resource side and throwing the bass in its own compressor.
You're also having to, I hear this complaint all the time, people trying to get their live stream mixes up and running, is the room sounds great, but online sounds terrible. And if your subs are either too loud or too quiet compared to what the live stream might need, that affects your level of what the bass does. So if your subs are pushing a little bit less, but you're trying to use the channel faders and push up the bass in order to make that feel a little bit more in the room, then on the stream you get too much bass, even though you've made it feel right in the room, right? So, when you start with a really well-tuned room that feels good with a standard mix that sounds good online, also sounding good in your room for the appropriate bass levels, that's another thing that you might have to make adjustments for, in the way that you set up your multi-bus system. Maybe you need to have a little bit different bass response. Maybe the kick drum and the bass need to go to their own bus, and maybe they get compressed together, or their level relationship is different because maybe your subs are lacking in the room, and so in the room you're cranking the kick drum up, and that makes it so that you're on your drum bus, the kick drum is smashing into the compressor, and the snare drum is kind of like tapping on the compressor. So those are things you've got to watch out for, knowing how your particular speaker system, to make it feel right in the room, is affecting how that your live stream comes across, and then making concessions for that. Because, in a perfect world, you would get the perfectly tuned PA and everything would be, wonderful. But as an elder, knowing full well all the budget constraints, that's not always the go-to solution. Sometimes it's like, well, if we change this thing on the console, then that works. Okay, so we'll use another bus on the console instead of, dropping 30 to 80 grand on a new, speaker system. You do what you can do, right?
Right.
Hey, this video is sponsored by Attaway Audio Academy, an online membership for helping church sound techs, worship leaders, and tech directors grow in their audio understanding so that it's not a mystery anymore, and you can get the confidence and competence to make great, consistent mixes week to week. We have a bunch of great courses, from Mixing Foundations that teaches you how to balance a mix and apply EQ, compression, and effects into your mix as well, and Broadcast Audio, which is what Gibran and I have been talking about, and the multi-bus system that I'd recommend churches set up so that they can get their mixes compressed well without it pumping or sounding weird, so that your mix doesn't have to be cranked up to 90 on your TV. You can find more information and how to sign up at attawayaudio.com/academy, or I'll drop a link down in the description below. Now, back to the interview. Now, on this one, compared to back in 2022, I can tell that you've made changes on the way that you've mixed the bass, because even though I can watch him and he's playing more than the part, right? So on Battle Belongs, there's that musical part where the guitars are playing octaves, the down, 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 down. So that's a really simple part. It's a pretty, almost a hook in the song. And your bass player is playing lots of fills in between there as well. And I'm watching him play fills, but I'm not it's not in my face, oh my goodness, this guy's playing fills the entire time. But that's a creative mix decision that you've made in order to make that fit well in the mix, right? You're blessing him by making his overplaying less apparent. But it still fits in the mix so that you're kind of that gatekeeper, if you will, on the way that the mix translates, and that you're kind of making it so that we're not highlighting people's weaknesses. We're kind of covering for it and making it sound better and more pleasing. Yeah, would it be cool if the bass cut a little bit more, and might it sound like a bigger bass guitar on small speakers? Yeah, but are we going to trade that for a distraction on too many notes? I wouldn't, and I think you made a good call on that one too. All the rest of this feels great. And I said this before, but I made this note at the end at like an hour and 22 minutes. And even at the end, when the song comes down, the music doesn't disappear on the live stream mix. And, you know, in headphones, it's easy to miss that. But if you're listening on small speakers or a phone, it becomes really obvious. It feels like karaoke, right? Like there's a song in the distance and there's a big vocal head, you know, sticking out. That's a good thing. So good job dialing in your compressors on that. Now, when we listen to 2024, the bass even got tighter even in a couple months. So I don't know if there was some changes you made to the bass compressor either on the input channel or on your bus, but it just felt tighter. Maybe he's playing differently.
Come all you sinners, come find his mercy, come to the table, he will satisfy. Taste of his goodness, find what you're looking for. For God so loved the world that he gave us his one and only Son to save us. Whoever believes in him will live forever.
I mean, maybe he's changed some settings or he's got a stomp box or something. But the bass is tighter, and on this one, I noticed the background vocals are tighter as well. Tell me a little bit about what you've done for your vocal chain. I know you added vocal tuning a long time ago, but you've added some more Waves plugins in the meantime. Like, what's that process look like for you? And kind of walk us through what your vocal chain's doing.
Yeah, I think the vocal chain was a series of baby steps and then one huge step. Added Live Professor just based once again on like one of your videos was helpful. And then two, just even being able to reach out to you for additional help on the setup. So we started off using Live Professor only for vocal tuning. And then along the way, just kind of hearing some more like vocal opportunities is the way I'll put it.
Spoken like a true elder.
Just decided to just like keep going. Like, I think my initial goal was to just through the Waves video that you did with that whole bundle and just do it step by step. But at one point, it was just ripping the Band-Aid off and just rolling out the entire chain. So I think I can actually show you share on screen, James.
That'd be awesome.
I got those pulled up here. So this is my vocal chain in Live Professor as it exists today. So like I said, we started with Waves Real Tune. You kind of notice it like it as like the third step in the chain. Just in realizing like at some point, just adding some of the other steps with Waves Real Tune being at the front of the chain, I think we were kind of hearing the tuner like a little bit more than we wanted to. And it seemed to be missing a lot more. So just went ahead, and the first step was to just add a little bit of REQ. Since I had the plugin, I just did, so I'm doing some de-esser before that, before it jumps into Waves Real Tune. I mean, you can't please everybody, but from time to time we do get some sound complaints just from like my ear and my training. I think a lot of that was coming from like those harsh vocal ranges that people would like hit from time to time. So added the F6 to just kind of dynamically pull out some of those like harsher vocal frequencies when they're singing, especially when they get singing loud. I think at one point I might have overkilled it.
You can take it too far, but that's how like how you know if you're getting dialed in is if you go to too much. You've got to find that spot before you can know, okay, I've reached the limit on that end of it. Now let's get it back to a happy medium.
Yeah, I think in your video, James, you kind of mentioned that you kind of set it up because there's only like 6 bands on here. Like you kind of have like a lower set and then a higher set. So I think maybe one Sunday I was just at rehearsal and for some reason I do not know what the issue was, but I just like decided to throw them like both one after the other, like one with the lower set and another one with the higher set. And it kind of just stuck because I kind of liked it.
Sometimes you need to grab all those frequencies. I think there's like 10 of the frequencies that I typically go for between all of them. And, it helps it glue a little bit. Like at lower levels, I feel like it doesn't matter so much. Like if you're just listening on a small speaker or if it's a quiet, worship set, even when they're singing loud, if it doesn't have to be up on top of a big full mix already, it doesn't matter so much. But if you want to get those levels up, above 88, 90, 92 dB SPL, A-weighted, slow for all of you people nerding out, then yeah, you kind of need it to be tamed a little bit in a way that just a normal compressor or a normal EQ is not going to do. You've got to make it a little bit dynamic. But when you get it dialed in and then you like bypass it, you're like, oh, okay, like this makes a difference.
Right. Next in the chain, like I have the LA2A in 1176, and I will say I consider the LA2A from Jesus. It is just, like I've watched the videos, like I don't claim to understand everything it does, but like you would hear sound engineers talking about like that in your face feel, and I could definitely hear it once I've like rolled it in. Like it just has a way of like, if you compress vocals right, to just like lock the vocals in their place. Like sometimes just hearing the mic without like music playing, like if they're just talking before rehearsal, I go, wow, that's really loud. And then like the music comes in and just it just sits where I want it to. Just got the LA2A for like just it being like that slow overall compressor. And then the Bluey 1176 for like, its super fast attack. I find is just like a really good like 1-2 punch. And I think like the thing that I probably enjoy the most about the chain is the C6 and what it does, especially on the male singers, at least on my team, in balancing their tone. Because, like you'll notice that they get really like chesty when they sing low, like there's a place. And then when they're like, Waymaker.
Up in the stratosphere.
Yeah, this is why I make sound and don't sing for worship. But yeah, just being able to like balance that, because I think without it, the vocals just wouldn't sit right, and it kind of almost felt like maybe they were falling out of compression a little bit too. But yeah, so like I think that's my current vocal chain. We kind of have all the keys set up for at least the keys that we sing in for Live Professor. I have those at the ready and just have everything else on like isolate, so they don't. I have some presets that I like that I have at the ready, but yeah, just ISO everything else except Waves Real Tune. It's in bypass right now because I probably had it probably left it at like a speaking part.
Right.
But yeah, so like that's my vocal chain. That's mainly what I use Live Professor for. I can show you a little bit about the acoustic and electric, James, and get your opinion on it. This is kind of just, once again, just me kind of poking around a little bit online. But, I kind of became like a fan of like the stereo everything camp.
Yeah.
And just kind of just trying to put things in a certain spot in the stereo spectrum. So specifically with our acoustic guitar being like a mono signal, what I like, just had I like to shop Wave sales on Black Friday.
Yeah.
The best deals there. So usually pick up like 3 plugins. So like picked up a doubler and just kind of use a doubler to like add a little bit of delay and a little bit of pitch shift to the acoustic. I kind of like how it sounds like both channels in stereo, like listening to it on like computer speakers. My mileage at front of house might vary. So sometimes I just maybe would like not use it at front of house, like just take the other side out of my front of house mix.
Uh-huh.
I find the stream, like the acoustic guitar on the stream ends up being louder than I want it to.
Right.
If I use it that way. So I don't know. I would take wisdom there. And the same thing for the electric. I think it works better on the electric guitar. I think all the mixes that you've listened to, we've had some stereo lines out for his electric guitar, so I didn't have to use it. But sometimes we do have like a mono source electric guitar. So I just kind of just throw something in waves to double and like add a little bit of width there.
Yeah, that can be a lot of fun. I would even experiment. It looked like your direct was off on the acoustic. And are you doing this as a send, like on an effects send, or are you doing this like as an insert into the channel? Like, how are you routing that?
It's a separate channel, if I understand.
Okay, so yeah, you wouldn't want the direct on then because you've got the direct sound going just from the channel fader. Then this is through a send or a direct out into Live Professor and then returning on a different channel on the board. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense the way that you've got it set up then. So then all you've got returning is the delayed and pitch shifted stuff. If it feels right and makes it feel a little bit bigger, again, this is a game of baby steps. And even sometimes I'm like wondering if I've got the placebo effect or if I'm actually doing something to make an improvement. And that's what you get when you get into these more subtle things. But at the same time, you know, a lot of pro mixers are doing very subtle things, but they get great results. So it's definitely a lot of fun to play around with. I think pitch shifting and chorus kind of things and doubling is underutilized because it is kind of a subtle thing. Like if you overuse it, everybody knows. So, you know, you don't want to go crazy. But, you know, again, if it makes it sound that much bigger, we're making baby steps in the right direction. So I think that's awesome that you've got it set up that way. If you're interested in setting up plugins on your Midas, Behringer, or PreSonus console, I've got a bunch of videos about how I do it and the way that I set up Live Professor to make those changes for vocal tuning and other Waves plugins. There's a whole playlist of videos, so you can find that down in the description below as well. In addition, I'm a Waves affiliate, which means if you buy some of the plugins that we talk about through the links down in the description below, it generates a very small commission for me and it helps support the channel. So if you want to support the channel, make sure you click those links before you buy. Or another way that you can do it that's totally free is just mashing that thumbs up. Now, back to the interview.
Last thing on the vocals. At this point, the only thing coming from that you're hearing coming from the console vocally is the reverb. I try to use resources well, but I kind of wish I had more on the M32 to be honest. So I love plates on vocals. They just work. And then I use a little bit of the stereo delay, like maybe like a short, maybe quarter is like my usual go-to, just to like add a little bit of texture there.
So tell me about vocal effects and kind of where that's come from.
Yeah. So I think like you did a really good explanation in your video, in the course, vocal effects. I've been using those a lot. So I kind of have maybe like some basic go-tos in maybe like a 2-second delay and maybe like anywhere between 20 and 50 seconds of like pre-delay on like the plate.
20 to 50 milliseconds.
Yeah, milliseconds. Yeah. Yeah, but I like plates a lot. So I find like they just add like a tail, like a nice tail, and then the stereo delay, like just a really short delay. I usually like using like a quarter note tap to just add a little bit of texture. But what I also found is like using those two reverbs in addition to like setting the crowd mics just right, just kind of like fits everything together.
One area where I know I need to grow in is my ability to blend in the different acoustic type sources together to make them feel like one. Because, you know, like the crowd mic doesn't do all of it by itself. And the reverb, you know, like a hall reverb doesn't do all of it by itself. And the plate reverb doesn't always do it all of it by itself. Or the early reflections from this or the tails from that. That's one place where I need to grow. But I feel like it's right when you don't notice it is what I'm trying to say is like, and that's one of the things that I noticed about your vocals is they sounded really, really natural when all the band is in, when everything's full. That vocal just feels like, you know, it's locked in the pocket, it's tucked back by the effects. There's all these good support things happening, both with the band mix and with the way that the effects and the crowd mics are doing it. One other note that I did find which part it was, but there's a section when the band comes down the January 7th, 2024 at 1:28:20. When the band comes down, it feels like the delay is a little bit much. When the band is in, the vocal delay sounds awesome. I'm wondering if maybe like splitting the difference on how bright it is might be able to tuck that back a little bit more for when it comes down.
You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone.
It's not noticeable when the band's in, like I said, but a lot of times when you're setting up effects in a live environment, you can end up making them brighter than what they might feel right for a broadcast mix. So, the snare reverb was a little bit bright too, but it probably sounded awesome in the room. And I've run into that when I've been pushing up effects in the room and my delay sounds so good. And I'm like in it. And then I listen back to the board mix and I'm like, holy Toledo, that is a lot of bright delay. What was I thinking? Well, I wasn't thinking that's how it was. The distance between you and the speakers and all the hot water bags between the speakers and you makes those effects darker. And you're getting a lot of other reflections from the room there as well. So even that will tame and kind of soften the brightness of our delays and reverbs. So sometimes, even if you just made it a little bit darker on the live stream compared to in the room, if you could do that, just turn the low pass filter down a little bit more on those effects. And that's going to help it tuck back just a little bit more. So that's one other thing that's helpful. Gibran, this has been really helpful for me seeing what you've done and all the stuff you've applied from, the YouTube videos, from Attaway Audio Academy courses. Kind of what's your parting thoughts? Anything you'd like to share with other volunteers that are out there? Maybe they're feeling discouraged about how their live stream sounds. Maybe they feel like, this is too much to learn. What would you say to that person that's like, all right, I really want to take my broadcast mix and my in-person sound up a notch?
Yeah, I would say sound is a series of baby steps. Keep at it, keep working, and if anything, start with the fundamentals. I think as fun as the journey into like professor in latency and buffering and like all of the more nerdy stuff could be to get right in time aligning and those types of things, I rely a lot on the fundamentals. Like every single time I show up at the console, step one is gain structure. Am I gaining stuff up correctly? And then from there, it's like, are they hitting the compressor and reacting the right way? So just really spend the time to hone your craft and focus on the fundamentals. Just like everything in life, you get better with practice. I've had a lot of fun just using Tracks Live to just record a worship set and just go back and just tweak and go, I wonder what this gate does. I wonder if I compress this way, what it will do. So I think those are good things too. Just keep working at it. Don't be afraid to push yourself and go back and listen to your mix critically and go, what's the next thing to fix? As far as I think I've come, like I still want to go, I wonder if I could do a better job on the drum kit. I'm not going to mix a Grammy record ever, but I could try to get there. So yeah, and then lastly, do it with the heart of service. It's a job that could be thankless, but just know that you're helping somebody engage in worship and in getting them closer to Christ when you're doing it. Take the complaints with a grain of salt, but also take them seriously too, right? Like don't just dismiss somebody because the sound's too loud. And my personal thing is like, there's no loud or soft fader on my console. It just doesn't mean anything to me. But, really take the time to listen and fix the things you can. Like consider maybe my mix might just be too bright, so I could support it a little bit more on the low end. Or maybe there's something in my vocal range that might just be unpleasant, and be willing to address that too within reason. So yeah, just know that you're doing a good job. It is sometimes thankless, but it is absolutely necessary and important.
Awesome. Well, Gibran, thanks for coming on. It's been great getting to know you the last few years and see how you've grown. I loved, listening to all those mixes and just seeing where it's come from and where it's going. I'm excited to see what the future is for Laurelwood's online church services. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for being on the Attaway Audio YouTube channel.
Sure. All right, thanks.
Hey, thanks for watching to the end and joining me and Gibran in this conversation. I hope you learned some things from it and that it sparked your interest in learning how to make your live stream mix better over time. For more information about the Attaway Audio Academy and how you can learn to make this multi-bus system work for your church and your console, go to attawayaudio.com/academy. Don't forget to hit subscribe and that like button to tell YouTube, hey, this is good stuff. I want to see some more of it. And as always, remember, it's all about the low end. Avoid the sound tech solo, and nobody leaves church humming the kick drum. We'll see you back here next time on Attaway Audio.